Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome another video, and it honestly takes me a long time to do these, so I really want to apologize. I get comments every single day where people give suggestions, and of course the number one suggestion is just more videos. Like, there's not enough videos on YouTube, so us being able to put out a video is kind of a big deal because there's people waiting for me. So I do want to apologize for anyone that's been feeling deprived of videos lately. We're trying our best over here, so I am hoping to get out some good quality ones as soon as I can. This video for today is the third in the line of top 3 build videos. Just like the other ones, I want really anyone who's unlocked blueprints to be able to use this stuff without having to fish for specific affixes or have some kind of crazy synergies going on. Top 3 survival, a lot of fun builds here. Again, if you aren't the biggest fan of the builds I'm gonna list, please make a note in the comments. Definitely give a like if you like these kind of videos. Subscribe if you want to see more. As I always say, the best builds in any color of any game, I guess, to be honest, is whatever you feel comfortable with. So do not feel like you need to run my builds in order to get wins. This is just the stuff that I like. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so first build I want to talk about. This one is one that I was actually a hater of for a long time. But every time we run this, it's actually fairly potent. So I'm starting to become a bigger fan of it. Honestly, feels good at 99% of the game. There's only a couple instances where this doesn't feel very good. And that's basically the repeater crossbow, aka the JK-47. We used to call it the AK, but then people told me that Enter the Gungeon has something called a JK, so we've been calling it that lately. The repeater though, the assault rifle, as you all know, it's a relatively straightforward weapon. You basically hunker down, you hold square, or whatever your attack button is, and then bullets just fly forward. Back in the day, it used to be a lot worse than it was. In version 1.2, they added a little root. It's not a stun, but it's a mini lockdown that happens on the first bullet, and not every subsequent bullet, but probably about every 4th bullet will snare the enemy. The repeater crossbow can crit so long as an enemy is snared. So your second bullet is usually a crit, and then something like your 4th or 5th bullet is a crit too. By the time you get to the 5th bullet, hopefully the monster's dead. But in some cases it might not be, especially if you're fighting an elite, especially if it's bosses. So in that case you need some kind of route to go along with it. Honestly, the number 1 route in the game is gonna be Wolf Trap. Wolf Trap you get at the very start of the game, you don't have to get a blueprint for it. So repeater crossbow, Wolf Trap, it's like bread and butter right there. You can't really go wrong with that. All you have to do is lay down the wolf trap and hold square. Now, you don't want to really spam the wolf traps. In all honesty, I'll save wolf traps for just elites. And then any other monster, I'm just planting myself in front of the hallway and holding square and letting everything just funnel right into me. And that's fine, because for the most part, that will kill monsters. Now, besides the wolf trap, that basically takes care of everything in a straight line, and you can also duck. So you can attack things like the grappler, can also be a pretty good way to outplay the enemy. But the one thing that will outplay you almost 99% of the time are bats. And that's like the number 1 menace for this build. Imagine going into prison depths, you have a hammer spawns all these bats. All you can do is shoot the one that's in front of you. You're lucky if you have the bonus arrows, the phantom arrows that shoot up and forward. If you're unlucky, maybe you only have pierce on hit. So a wolf trap doesn't really help with that either. and you really don't want to jump and shoot. So the only things that will really help you in those situations are between Powerful Grenade and Root Grenade. Now you might say, okay, I should take Root Grenade because I'm using the assault rifle, the repeater crossbow. So it's gonna want a root. Root Grenade has root in the name. How can that be bad? So really, Root Grenade to me is not really the pick. Now, if I don't have a wolf trap, you have to get the Root Grenade. The Root Grenade at that point is like a budget wolf trap. So I honestly, whatever I find first between wolf or root, I'll grab it and then just wait for the wolf trap for the rest of the game. Now, if you get massively unlucky and never see a wolf trap and you're sitting on the root, that's fine, at least you're able to get something. But don't pass on the Root Grenade just because it's not that great of an item. It's gonna do its job, you just would rather have a wolf trap. Now, in 4BC, wolf traps are incredible. They can kill monsters on their own because they spew poison, deal bonus damage to poison, they increase your damage. It's a really nasty item for it to be a beginner item. It honestly makes no sense, but we love the wolf trap, so we use it whenever we can. Now, if you don't want to run Powerful Grenade, if you don't want to run Root Grenade, there are some new green-purple grenades that you can use. They've been around since version 1.4, but now that we're on 1.5, maybe you're going to experiment a little more with your color selection. So you can use ice grenades, you can use stun grenades. Those are kind of cool because they have damage reduction built in. So even though it only has like 4%, that starts to add up. Giant Whistle's actually really good at killing elites, but when you have a wolf trap with the assault rifle, there's no elite is gonna survive that onslaught. In my opinion, the whistle at that point is kind of redundant. You may as well just spend that slot on having a AoE burst of damage that can clear out the bats from either the hammer or the purulent zombie, or even say tentacles from Conjunctivius. A lot of different use scenarios for a grenade. We have our weapon, we have our skills. There is a fourth slot in there for you to do whatever you want with. Originally that was always a shield, and shields are honestly a good choice in this because once you run out of bullets, you'll definitely want a way to get your bullets back. But now that we're on version 1.5, it is possible to run Ice Bow and Frost Blast in the second slot. Now what that does is, you can imagine you have a monster, you might have an elite or a boss, your wolf trap is on cooldown, you basically have to unload this damage into the monster, but also keep it in check. And the mini snare from the repeater crossbow isn't gonna do that. So you could get an Ice Bow that has increased slow duration, or you can get the Frost Blast, keep it frozen for longer, and then just kite backwards until your wolf traps come off cooldown. Now, that's good gameplay for people who don't want to just run a shield. A Rampart, for example, will just let you block and then hold square right in the monster's face, and it'll probably just vanish at that point. The other option is to run something like a Cudgel, because again, the repeater crossbow does real damage. All you need is like a moment. So Cudgel, with that increased stun, not only do you get your arrows back, but you'll also have plenty of time to unload into the monster. As we're running through the maps, we basically have this repeater crossbow, we have a wolf trap so we can kill elites and bosses, we have a grenade so that we can clear all the trash stuff if we get too many monsters on top of us, and now we need mutations to go along with it. Now, it's survival, you can go classic Necro Dead Inside. That basically goes for every single build today. Necro Dead Inside is probably the bread and butter for survival builds. Repeater Crossbow can use both of those just fine. I wouldn't try to go with much else because there's not a lot for you to do. Cooldown reduction on parry with Blind Faith honestly isn't all that bad. But because Repeater Crossbow excels in you being away from monsters, maybe you're not going to parry that much. And Wolf Trap's cooldown is 14 seconds, and there's 2 of them. So for you to use Blind Faith to get that cooldown, like knocked down even further, probably not necessary compared to just going something like Instinct Master of Arms. So Instincto, as you all know, crits give you cooldown reduction. This thing crits on the second bullet almost guaranteed. With the Wolf Trap, you're going to get a ton of cooldown reduction off the very first Wolf Trap. By the time it gets into the second Wolf Trap, that trap might be off cooldown. It's actually a little screwed up, to be honest. So Wolf Traps, I'm looking at it right now. I know you all can't see it. Wolf Trap, 14-second cooldown on monsters that don't resist the root. They're rooted for 6 seconds. So 2 traps rooted for 12 seconds total, and you have cooldown reduction from Instinct. I feel like that's pretty good. I don't know about you all, but I think that's a lot of lockdown. Other than that, there's not a lot else to say about this. I mean, Repeater Crossbow is pretty straightforward, and there's a lot of room to experiment, but it's a pretty straightforward setup where all you do is you take X, Y, Z, and then you can probably win the game off that. Alright, so the next build, and this one, I was really debating on what to call this because there's a lot of stars in this show. There's a lot of stars in this show, and not all of them really excel over the other. Every bit of this build is pretty good. So it's really hard to say which one goes in the little profile picture here. So what this is basically just generic melee survival. I feel like that's the best term for it because there's really anything can go into this. All you have to do is get the right skills and the right mutations, and then you might win off of it. Now this is probably the weaker of the 2 other builds, but because it's so generic, you can just mix and match to try to figure out which you like the most. Melee survival really encompasses a lot of different weapons. There's nutcrackers, broadsword, shovel, Valmont whip, I'm just looking through the list right now, war spear, symmetrical lance, giant killer, seismic strike, flawless, flint. Wow, there's a whole lot of melee weapons here. But as far as like having a top 3 build, having something that's actually gonna win you games, maybe there's only 2 of these that I would really go for. And that's a tie between Giant Killer and honestly the Shovel. Now, Valmont Whip used to be the go-to. Like, forget all of the other melee weapons, I'm taking Valmont Whip. But since they nerfed it, and by nerf I mean they made it red-purple instead of red-green, we can't use Valmont Whips in survival anymore. Now, there's a lot of other melee weapons in there, but they all are, in all honesty, lower on the tier list for me because they fail on too many levels. Giant Killer, the only thing Giant Killer does wrong is that it struggles on killing normal enemies, but it's gonna kill a normal enemy no matter what. Like, as long as you're actually attacking monsters, it's gonna kill it. And then once you get to a boss, it really kills those. Elites almost one-shots a lot of elites. We actually learned from Forza, for those who watch the French stream, the 4th hit from the Giant Killer is often enough to straight one-shot elites. And that is really nice to see. Now, on bosses, it's really strong too. Compare that to something like War Spear or even Symmetrical Lance. If you all have seen my streams, Symmetrical Lance is honestly super fun. I'll take it. I'll mow through Promenade. It's poetry in motion. It's an amazing sight to see. But then we have another video called Worst Giant Fight, ever, and that one uses Symmetrical Lance. And you can tell where Symmetrical Lance is good and Symmetrical Lance is bad. And that's basically on a boss. Like the Giant. And in all honesty, Timekeeper is the same way. Conjunctivious can be the same. It's a little easier to kill Tentacles, but actually chasing down Conjunctivious with Symmetrical Lance is actually awful. Same with War Spear. Same with Flint, in all honesty. I wish Flint was a little better, but this is a top 3 video. I can't really have Flint in there. There's also Flawless and Seismic Strike. Those are fun. You're more than welcome to mix and match those in. But as soon as you get hit, the Flawless is kind of gone. And then Seismic Strike doesn't really mesh well with some of the other stuff we're going to be using. Now, because this is just called generic melee survival, we usually have some kind of shield involved with this. Now that we're on 1.5, you can use Ice Bow as well. Frost Blast actually works really well with something like the Shovel. A lot of these survival items actually deal bonus damage to frozen targets, not just the Nutcracker doing bonus crits. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with freezing on your triangle button, but if you aren't really into that, you can just go with the shield. And honestly, any shield is going to work. My favorite is probably a mix between either Thunder Shield or the Punishment, but if you don't have those, just run with whatever you can get a parry off and you'll be perfectly fine. Now, so that's the first star of the show, is the actual melee weapon. The second star of the show is Telluric Shock, and I don't know what made me start using this thing, but now I'm at the point where every time I find Telluric Shock, I'm honestly taking it. And it's because it counts as a melee attack, and in this setup, I might be using either Berserk or Hunter's Instinct. If you're playing in 4BC, Berserk gives you damage reduction on any melee kill. It doesn't have to be red items, doesn't have to be green items. You just need to kill something with a melee attack, you'll get damage reduction. Now, Telluric Shock counts as a melee kill if the monster's within a certain range. It's basically a down slam, and down slams are melee attacks. So Telluric Shock will give you Berserk. Now, Killer Instinct, I honestly used to never use Killer Instinct. I thought Killer Instinct wasn't that great because of the idea that skills will reset themselves with Hunter's Instinct. So, come to find out, there's skills that do melee attributes. So a Telluric Shock will actually reduce its own cooldown on kill if you're using Killer Instinct. And that piece of it honestly blew my mind. You actually start with Killer Instinct as soon as you start playing the game. So being able to reduce that cooldown once you get your first Hand of the King kill is actually really good. One of the builds we had, and this is no spoilerino for a future YouTuber, but I was using Telluric Shock with a legendary Telluric Shock. Double Telluric Shock. It's borderline illegal. They made that impossible to have unless you have a legendary item. And being able to reduce each other's cooldowns is honestly disgusting. So it was really cool. Obviously that's Exodia, so you can't bank on that happening. But when you do actually have one Telluric Shock with Killer Instinct, you'll be able to jump into a mob, kill everything, get off maybe 1 or 2 attacks with a giant killer, kill the next enemy, and then all of a sudden your Killer Instinct's back. So where survival lacks is being able to quickly go through biomes without really having to do a lot of work. And what we used to run was Double Powerful Grenade. That used to be how you do that, is you have this gigantic explosion and you just destroy everything. I honestly feel like Telluric Shock might be the spiritual balanced successor to Double Powerful Grenade. Now, of course, after the one Telluric Shock, you do have one more slot, which could go to the Powerful Grenade if you really want. I feel as though that might be a little redundant. You'd probably be better off with getting a Whistle. That way you're able to kill any elites that you run across Shovel's actually really good at killing elites, but again, Shovel's a very generic item. It's just straightforward power, there's no crit involved. But being able to just use Whistle and the monster is just gone off your screen, like that's a lot of power. So I do like using Whistle, but there's actually a third item that you might use in this setup, and that could be the Death Orb. Now, in all honesty, I am not a fan of Death Orb. I actually don't really like using it that much. You will actually find yourself in moments where you can't just jump in. A good example of this is in Prison Depths. If you just jump onto something like a slasher, and you basically can't really go into the darkness without Telluric Shock being up, that's when you use Death Orb. And you just throw Death Orb down the hallway, and something in that hallway should die. If nothing dies, then it's a weak Death Orb, and hopefully you can find a new one. You have the options between going Killer Instinct, or if you're on 4 BC, you could use Berserk instead. After those, we'll go ahead and say you can use Old Classic, which is Necro Dead Inside. If you don't want to do that and you're running the Giant Killer, especially if you're running Death Orb or Giant Whistle, you can run Instinct Master of Arms. Most monsters can't really deal with a Shovel. Most monsters can't really deal with a Telluric Shock either. And a lot of monsters can't deal with either a Death Orb or a Giant Killer. So when it comes to bosses, you just need to survive. And that's the number one thing that this build is good at, is just living. So find the mutation set that helps you live the most if it's not Necro Dead Inside, and go with that. Alright, so the last set, the last build, and this one, I really hope people don't think I'm trolling, but every time I take it, it usually feels pretty good. And we actually made a video about this that has like Reinhardt on an Overwatch map, but then it has like Dead Cells monsters on it. It wasn't my pinnacle of thumbnails, but I was a little proud of that one when I made it, not gonna lie. So, full block. Full block is basically holding down triangle, and then monsters walk into you and die. And when you think about it, you don't really think it's gonna work, but with some shields, it's surprisingly strong, surprisingly viable. And when you're playing survival and you have stuff like necromancy, then the chance of death in biomes is pretty slim. On bosses, in the higher divisions, half the time you can just straight block these bosses. Now of course that means you're not getting no hits. And that's fine, because once you get the shield, then you don't really need a legendary item to go behind that. Curses could also be a problem, because you don't really want to hard block a curse. So we will want to get some kind of mob clearing items in order to supplement our full block. You're going to be skipping a couple 60 doors until you start to feel a little weaker. And that's honestly fine, because all you want to do is be able to get these free clears and then get free items from chests or buy an item from the shop that will carry you through the rest of the game. So full block, basically what we want to use is either a spike shield or a punishment. If you really want to be special, you can use both. And that's kind of interesting. There's some interesting gameplay that happens when you have a punishment in your inventory, but you're holding down the spike shield. I don't really want to showcase that here because I'm not sure if that's intended. Could be fixed later. A punishment you can't get until 3 BC, and spike shield comes off of the cleaver. So there might be a situation where you have one but not the other. So just use whichever one you get first that has the best affixes on it. Now, as I said, you hold down triangle, and then monsters just walk towards you, and chances are they're gonna die. Different shields do different damage values, and different shields reduce different amounts of damage. Looking at the list here, I can tell you all that Rampart reduces the most damage out of all the shields. It's 85% compared to Spike Shield's 75%. but all shields can actually get a bonus 7% built into the shield itself. So when you're running that, plus you have your amulet, and you're running necromancy, every block that you do that kills enemies will probably net 0 health gain, and if you're lucky, you might net positive on health gain. That's when you're really starting to stack some survival, and at that point, it's probably better off that you just hold triangle on every single monster. By the way, for those who are worried about doing this in 4BC, don't worry, you actually don't take melees if you full block. The only thing that you will take melees on is unblockable attacks. So that could be a bomb that's on the ground, that could be a bomber in the sky, that could be a bomber bat that's behind you or something. So long as you're blocking a projectile or a melee attack or even some lasers that are in the game, you will not take melees for it. Eventually you will get to a point where monsters start to hit really hard and you can't exactly full block everything. And that's fine because you have 3 other slots to do something with. Now for me, I would probably take Death Orb in this situation or the Giant Whistle. Giant Whistle is for the elite just in case you can't really full block it. And then the Death Orb is for a biome. Let's say you did some full blocks, now you're probably down to like half your health. The Death Orb is just gonna get you free kills and then get some of that health back. And all of that's actually really good for biome clears. For bosses, however, you need to do a little bit more than full blocking. There are some vids out there of us just blocking Concierge and it will kill itself. But your health is going to be really low at the end of it, so you probably need to press some other buttons. A good thing, honestly, I wish Survival had a couple more turrets, but Crusher is actually a really good item to have in this build, and the concept is pretty sound. You put the Crusher on the floor, you back up, and then you hold triangle. Any timekeeper, any concierge that walks into that, probably gonna die. And then if it does get the swing off, you're blocking it. And it actually deals damage when you block with Spike, Shield, and Punishment. So chances are, you will do real damage to these monsters so long as you're not letting go of triangle. Now, Death Orb, Crusher, Giant Whistle, all really good. Sometimes I'll even run with a tonic just to make sure that I can get my health back before I go to the next biome. But again, and tonic even has damage reduction built in. So you're starting to reduce a lot of the damage and healing it back up afterwards. Now, the tough part about this setup is the mutations. In all honesty, I had a real struggle outside of necromancy on what mutations to use. You could go with some of those damage dealing parry mutations, but I honestly don't know how useful that is. Definitely if you don't have a lot of options, feel free to take something like counterattack or take something like spite. There's nothing wrong with using those, but I feel like you're probably better off taking something like a blind faith and vengeance. Once again, we're splashing red into a green build, and when you're doing a full block anyway, you take a hit. So Vengeance gives you that additional damage reduction. At some point, you're probably going to hit the cap on damage reduction. That's how crazy this is going to get. But all of that together, your chances of death, fairly slim, so long as you're holding triangle and you're pressing L2 or R2. Chances are something's going to die. So that's actually 3 mutations right there. You could experiment. Actually, when I played this build, I reset multiple times because I want to see which of these is the most potent. You could go dead inside, but I like the idea of eating food to get my health back. You could go with what doesn't kill me so that you get healing off parry. But again, I'm running Necro, maybe that's a little overkill because at some point I can just kill stuff without blocking with my Powerful Grenade or my Death Orb. Alright, now one thing I really want to recommend here, and again, I don't want to really get into drawing Exodia, but I do want to point out that the one colorless item that really blows this build out of the water is colorless Spite Sword. For those who remember, Spite Sword is the sword that deals crits if you take a hit. And when you're running a full block setup with Vengeance, you're gonna take a hit, and then you're gonna do a buttload of damage, critical damage, on whatever boss or elite that you're fighting. So a lot of times if I'm playing survival and I get a colorless Spite Sword, I'm going full block. Doesn't even matter what my build was previously, I will probably forfeit my build and look for a shield immediately. Because the power of being able to hold triangle and kill stuff, and then press square and kill the next stuff, surprisingly good. I actually super recommend it. Of course, that is like top decking something amazing, but hey, if you can get that, then you will be pleasantly surprised on the results. Alright, so that is actually it. Top 3. Again, this is my first time doing this kind of exclusive YouTube content, so I really hope you like it. We talked about repeater crossbow, we talked about just generic melee survival, and then full block with either shielding or shielding plus some kind of melee item. So I know a lot of survival items get a bad rap for being slow, but there's a lot of stuff in here that's not slow at all. And it's definitely a lot of fun once you get rolling with it and once you get more comfortable with this kind of gameplay. What's really nice is a lot of it feels like I'm playing Berserk, except I have like a huge health bar. And then after dying multiple times playing Glass Cannon Tactics, it's nice to actually be able to survive like any hit that comes my way. So again, I do hope you all like this video. If you do, let me know what your favorite survival builds are in the comments below. If you don't like any of my builds, definitely feel free to experiment with your own and let me know what you end up coming up with. That's actually all 3 colors. If you haven't seen the other 2, definitely give a look at those. That's Brutality and Tactics. Other than that, I want to thank everyone for watching the vid today. We've actually been doing really well in the YouTube space, and I always appreciate you all watching the videos. So keep up those kind words of encouragement, keep up that gameplay in Dead Cells, and definitely good luck. I wish you all the best and get into that final true boss with some of the best builds that we could come up with.